everybody. My name is Rylee Hince. I'm the Executive Director of the Lake Pepin Legacy Alliance. And between Carrie and Carly, I feel like all of the background has been covered. So I'm going to go into just kind of like what's the real local example of all these unintended consequences down in Lake Pepin. So I've been with Lake Pepin Legacy Alliance for almost 12 years. We're a nonprofit organization started by a group of neighbors that witnessed how quickly Lake Pepin was filling in, and they decided we're going to form a nonprofit and start researching it. And we found out actually there's a ton of research because, as Carrie mentioned, you can collect sediment core samples and trace them back to the Minnesota River. And so it's this really interesting case study of everything that's coming downstream and settling in this particular spot and having real impacts on the community members that live there and the people that come visit there. So I just want to provide an example and let you all see like what is happening downstream and how are we connected to what's happening particularly in the Minnesota River and even more particularly at the Nick Point and within the Le Sueur watershed. So I'm going to keep my presentation pretty brief, but I think it will hopefully shed some light on how these issues are connected. So we really represent a community response to a disappearing lake. Carrie mentioned that Lake Pepin is filling in much quicker than it would. It's disappearing much faster than it would. You can look at some data. If you just take the data that was already collected for natural rates of erosion, Lake Pepin should exist another 4,000 years. If you look at current rates of sedimentation, we're going to lose a third of the entire volume of Lake Pepin by the end of this century. So it's filling in significantly faster than it was pre-European settlement. And of course, our beautiful illustration here is really just the Minnesota River pouring sediment into Lake Pepin. I think if nothing else, this slide really demonstrates what's happening. So in August of 2019, we hosted what we called a mud picnic. It was the first time we did it, the only time we did it, and possibly the only time we ever can do it, because what we did is ferry people across the navigation channel into this island that's been forming that demonstrates where all that sediment is collecting. And we hosted a picnic, and it looks really fun because we had these tables and drinks, and we had speakers out there, and we had everyone standing on this island that people are in ankle-deep water for maybe 300 meters out into the middle of the river, and you can just walk around here. But if you're looking at the river from the navigation channel or from a home, it's like, wow, there's this beautiful open expanse of water. It's actually inches deep, and it's just waiting to be exposed. And so the caption is like a little removed, but 2 years later, and this is the zoomed out version, this is what this exact same area looks like. So we have climate change accelerating both flood and drought cycles. And when you have those peak flows, as Carrie talked about, that's flushing sediment into the river system. We also have drought, and drought is what allows all that sediment to be exposed at the head of Lake Pepin. So now we have this massive extension of an island that happened in 2 years. And if you were, I don't have an image of it from this year, but now you have more mature trees starting to grow there, and this is a completely different stretch of the river than what people remember. And many years ago, when I was doing more presentations on the Minnesota River, I remember talking to a couple, and some of you probably know this couple, who lost, I don't know how many feet of their yard overnight in a flash flood on the Minnesota River. You probably know what I'm talking about. And they woke up one morning and like half their yard was gone. It had just fallen into the river. And holy cow, what is happening? It's sad. It's like, this is our home. We're losing our home. And now I think for the first time, for the community members around Lake Pepin, they knew this was happening. It was happening slow, but it was all happening under the surface of the water. And now it's not. And I've had meetings where people are coming to me actually crying. And you're like, this is where we were going to spend our retirement years. This is where our kids grew up. This is what we used to do on the river. And now it's gone. It's gone in a year. It's scary. And I think that is like the critical piece of this is just how quickly it changes for people and how eye-opening it is when that change happens so fast. So we've kind of talked about this already, but Lake Pepin being that collection point, I just wanted to make sure you can all see the watersheds that contribute to Lake Pepin, and then an example of one of the bluffs on the Lasur where we paddled in. So Lake Pepin, in order to meet its water quality goals, needs to cut sediment loading by 50%. And if you remember, I put 80% of the sediment originates in the Minnesota River watershed, 85 to 90% some years. So how do we achieve this goal? How do we cut, if there's so much material moving through the system and this is a massive change, how is Lake Pepin going to achieve its goal? Right now, it's not. We're just watching that happen, and sometimes we feel like there's not a whole lot we can do about it. We were involved when the governor passed the buffer initiative in 2015, and we saw that as low-hanging fruit. Like, yes, this is already on the books, let's do that. I know it was controversial at the time, but I think the reality of the aftermath of that is that there is this real mismatch in the scale of the problem and the scale of the solutions that we're trying to implement. And some of that is kind of the geologic nature of this whole issue, exacerbated by climate change. We don't have a system that currently supports, or quite frankly, the amount of funding that it would take to totally transition our system to something that would be supportive of protecting Lake Pepin long-term, of protecting the Gulf of Mexico, of improving the Minnesota River. There's just this mismatch occurring, and so that makes our work really challenging. I'm not going to go into this slide at all, but I just wanted to list, and this is old, I pulled it from an old PowerPoint, so some of these might have changed over time, but we're still relying on voluntary initiatives, and there's a bunch of them. Is it actually changing anything in Lake Pepin? Not from our perspective. So that doesn't mean this isn't really important work that can model the type of things that we want to see, but there's no scaling up of it right now to address the massive issue that we're experiencing here. We can't all live upstream. So back in the 70s, there was a group that coined this term called Citizens for a Clean Mississippi River, who understood that sedimentation was affecting Lake Pepin. They were also concerned about wastewater treatment plants and sewage being dumped into the river. But we still like to bring this phrase back because we can't all live upstream. Even if you're in your own local watershed, you are connected to those people whose water is draining onto your land, or your land and water is draining somewhere else. And Lake Pepin just happens to be the recipient of all of it. It stops in various places and moves along the riverbed, and then it ends up there. And so it's not because, it is because we're an incredible organization that we're here today. But it's also because we just happen to be situated in this spot that collects, and that we can actually monitor and understand hundreds of years of sedimentation. And it's tied to these bigger, state issues, regional issues, national issues. And it's really just kind of an interesting coming together of diverse partnerships in how you just look at the science behind how the river moves. So the layers of sediment, they act as a quantifiable demonstration of how water connects us. The health of Lake Pepin relies on different land use choices upstream to mitigate erosion. And I think as our first two speakers have already said, and I'll just double down on it, we have to recognize and account for our external impacts. It is the only way to improve the system. Alternatively, we can lose Lake Pepin, that's an option. We can continue to pollute the Gulf of Mexico, that's also an option. We can lose land and send it downstream. Oh, did I do that? I might have done that. So it's a choice. These are public dollars that we're spending. It's a choice for all of us that we need to make of what do we actually care about, what do we value, and there are ways that we can do things differently. We just have to figure out how can we scale that up and how can we make sure that we're protecting the resources that we value. So that's it, and then I just ended with, this was the group from the 70s that passed their funds on to us, the remaining $5,000 they have in the account, and they finally passed it to us as like a passing of the torch of generations protecting the river and trying to continue to do this good work. And so I appreciate you all letting me be here to represent those downstream impacts.